All right, so we've been through some rough times lately on this podcast, where for the last 3 weeks we watched the worst shows in the world. We watched It's About Time, The Occasional Wife, and The Occasional Wife seems amazing compared to the other two shows. My Mother the
My
Car.
Mother the Car. For a minute, it was so bad I couldn't even remember what it was that we watched. Yeah, My Mother the Car.
Some of the literal worst sitcoms of all time, which just coincidentally all happened. Really, just those like again, It's About Time and My Mother the Car, but right in the mid '60s. What the heck was going on? It was a bad era for bad sitcoms. Not only that, but yeah, our old recorder broke, so we were recording on a dilapidated old phone, and the sound quality was awful. So we're coming out of the woods now, out of the horrible, dark, fog-infested awfulness of both bad sound and terrible shows. The sound, again, this is a brand new recorder we just got, so it seems like everything's working. It might not be perfect, but it certainly will be better than the last 3 episodes, which sounded awful. So thank you to everyone for sitting through those horrible shows and the horrible sound. Everything should be better now. So just to kick us straight out of here, because normally we kind of tie things together, like, oh, maybe because last week we watched a show about a talking car, maybe this week we'll do Knight Rider or something, but not good enough. We need to just get all the way away from shitty TV and just watch something good. So you suggested we should watch Cracker with Robbie Coltrane. So what's your experience with this show?
PBS, I imagine, is where I first saw that. I've seen quite a few of it. Quite a few.
Yeah, and I remember just when Harry Potter came out, that was just the first thing that I believe you said to me, but like, oh, that's the guy.
Yeah, that's how you guys would know Robbie Coltrane. But he's been around. In fact, just passed away last year, I think it was, 2022. But he's quite a well-known British actor.
Right.
And Cracker is excellent. And what I remember of it, excellent.
Yeah, Harry Potter was pretty good for that in general, of having, famous ass Alan Rickman and Professor McGonagall. I don't remember her name.
Oh, Maggie Smith.
Right. Yeah, so they did a pretty good job of, and they actually hired good kids too. Like Daniel Radcliffe's done a bunch of neat stuff. I actually just saw a movie he was in where he gets a pair of guns bolted to his hands, so he can't take them off. Super weird.
British TV, movies, TV, whatever, I find they do very well with their child actors because they don't seem to pick them with the idea that they're beautiful or stars or you're an actor.
Yeah, well, I would say the exception to that in Harry Potter's case was Hermione, because Hermione in the books was always described as sort of mousy and no one liked her and just a weird, drab person, where Emma Watson grew up to be. You know what's weird with her? Actually, she has a brother who is more beautiful than her. It's like, man, that family's ridiculous. But then on the other side, there's like Ron Weasley. He's easily the worst actor and grew up to be the gawkiest guy, but that's perfect for him.
Yeah. And her, when she started out as a kid in that TV, she was just a normal looking girl. Like, I didn't find she was like, oh my God, what a beautiful, beautiful child. She
Right.
just was pretty standard looking girl.
And she definitely nailed that being really annoying, so no one liked her type of thing. But yeah, so obviously he was, Robbie Coltrane was Hagrid in Harry Potter. So yeah, like you're saying, that's what I know him from. You're a wizard, Harry. And I was a little surprised with Cracker. Just the first thing I saw was that it's from 1993. And I don't know why I'm surprised, because Harry Potter started in the early 2000s. So obviously if he was in Cracker before then, it all lines up. For some reason, I expected it to be more recent than that, because I'm kind of excited to see this because I've seen British comedies from all decades, but not dramas. I don't think I've seen any British dramas from the early 90s.
But see, he's a cop, and in the 90s, he would have been, I think he's playing somebody who would be in their 40s, early 40s, 40, 45-ish, somewhere in that range. And in 10 years later, in Harry Potter, he's a much older person. By that time, he's supposed to be, I would say, he's playing a part of somebody who's 55 or 60,
Right.
at least.
And magical, so who can say?
No,
You
see,
know?
he's 2,000 years old.
Half a giant or whatever. Yeah, and I guess because I knew him as Hagrid, I'm always surprised when I see him without the beard. I'm like, that's such a weird look that Hagrid, it just doesn't have a beard. What's going on? But anyway, so yeah, Cracker is a British crime drama series which ran for 3 seasons and 2 specials for 25 total episodes. And it was created and principally written by Jimmy McGovern. And one thing that I thought was interesting is one of the reasons, I mean, a lot of British shows don't run, excessively long anyway. But one reason it only ran for 3 series is he said after the first two, he's like, he wrote almost every episode. And he's like, I think I'm done. So they did do another season and then he came back to do these specials. But that's such a nice change from, our North American style, which is once something's popular, just run it into the ground until no one is watching it anymore. So I respect that about the British thing. And it was very popular. So the series follows a criminal psychologist, Dr. Edward Fitzgerald, who works with the Greater Manchester Police to help them solve crimes. Originally broadcast from 93 to 95, the show won the British Academy Television Award for Best Drama Series in 95 and 96, and Coltrane received the British Academy Television Award for Best Actor for 3 consecutive years, 94 to 96. So every year this show was on, he won Best Actor. And which, speaking of, though, the difference between America and England, in 1997, they did make an American remake that aired for 1 season, but I didn't bother trying to track that down because why? We've got the original, why bother? And the other little thing that I thought was neat is, it's set in Manchester, but it's actually filmed in Manchester. And I was thinking, I bet every British show is actually filmed where it's set because I don't think they could get away with it otherwise. There's too many famous landmarks and everybody knows the famous streets. Like if they tried to make London look like Manchester, everybody would know. And they'd be like, what is this?
Good point. I never thought about that, but that's probably true.
Because we absolutely do not do that. I've been watching this show lately with my cousin. It's called Fringe from the late 2000s. And it's actually a pretty good show so far. I don't mind it. But it's like paranormal investigators, X-Files stuff. But it's supposed to be set in Boston. And I was watching the pilot episode, and they drove by this place. It's just these power lines, but they're so distinctive that I'm like, those are in Etobicoke. I've walked by there before, and I looked it up, and yeah, it's filmed in Toronto. Later, they moved it to Vancouver. But the whole time, they're trying to pretend it's Boston. And that's not unusual. All of our shows do that. Nobody is ever in the city that they're in. Sometimes New York, because it's hard to fake New York. But yeah, I was just thinking that I bet England never does that because everybody would just be like, that's clearly not the place that it's supposed to be. And yeah, so that's about it. I've just got the basic beats, but yeah, let's just watch Cracker and wash away the terror of of the last few weeks.
The car.
Yeah. So I just got the first. Each one of these stories is a 2-parter. Like each storyline was basically 2 episodes. So I've got the first storyline, which is called The Mad Woman in the Attic. So series 1, episode 1 and 2. And one thing that I thought was a little interesting is I did track down copies of this show, but then I found it on YouTube, and the YouTube version is better quality than the one that I stole from somewhere. So if you want to watch this show, it's on YouTube. Although with the caveat that sometimes they region lock these things. It might only be on YouTube because we're in Canada. If you're in the UK, it might not be available on YouTube because they want you to go buy the Blu-rays or whatever. So I can't guarantee that it's on YouTube for all regions. But at least in Canada, it's right there. So season 1, episode 1 and 2, The Mad Woman in the Attic, Cracker, 1993. Now let's let all of our pain wash away. I guess that's nice that the at least the amnesiac guy can go back to the monastery. Because I was wondering that this guy who really just forgot everything about his life. I'm like, what is he even gonna do now? So at least I guess he can just go be a monk or whatever. But yeah, no question that like what we were hoping to accomplish, to actually watch a good show, I'd say yeah, it worked out. It is one of those things though. It's very complicated, like especially because it's 2 episodes, like what might be just a 1 episode thing in an American show, they really had double the time. So there's probably a lot of details in that. Like I feel like if I watch this again, maybe that's one of these things that makes a show last for all these years, is like you could easily watch this again and I'm sure there's plenty of little details that I didn't totally follow.
Yeah, and it's a good psychological lesson too. So that's why I think this show holds up. You can probably watch that 2 or 3 times, and every time you get it, you watch it, you'd go a little deeper and get more out of it.
Yeah, it'd be the perfect type of thing. Like if I had seen it back in the 90s when it was first on, say, or say, obviously it didn't play as much here, just our PBS or whatever, but say you're in England and it just is on every 10 years or so. I'd be like, hey, I'll watch that again because I probably don't really remember the details of the case and stuff. So, yeah, really cool in that sense. And yeah, just that we keep recognizing people. Like the head cop was Christopher Eccleston, did you say his name was?
Eccleston, yeah.
Yeah, when they first brought back Doctor Who, he was the first doctor back.
The other thing is too in this show, they really spent a lot of time developing characters, and everybody wasn't like black and white. Oh, this guy's a good guy and that guy's a bad guy. They really delved into their psyche. Even the murderer, we couldn't quite make out some of the dialogue that was going on, but they were giving us all kinds of hints about why he was like he was. The girl cop, we're just getting introduced to her. She obviously is going to be a big part of this show later on. But again, he puts her on the hot seat there, trying to get the amnesiac to say what he knows. And but I mean, he digs right into her psyche, and you can tell by the way she's sitting there. She's so uncomfortable that he's hitting. He's going right to the core with her, and it's true. And there's no like, gee, I'm sorry I had to put you through that, or no apologies or anything. Just hey, let's just put it out there and say what kind of a psycho you are, and here's what your problems are. And the whole show is like that. But that's why I think you can keep watching it, and the more you watch it, the more you'll get out of it. That's a sign of a really, really good show. Because some shows you watch them and you say, oh, I'll never watch that again. Or you start watching, oh, I've seen that, don't want to watch that again. But that show, no, I'd watch it again anytime, any number of times.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, not that I know anything about police procedure and stuff, but it did have stuff that, like that seems like, at least in this early, period of the show, this seems like the main hook is that because Fitzgerald is this criminal psychologist, he does have that way of, he like paints a picture. Let me tell you about you. Let me tell you about your whole personality. But yeah, he goes so over the top with it when he's talking to this guy who has amnesia. Just like, isn't this how it was? Isn't this how it was when you murdered this guy? Isn't this how it was when you murdered those women? And he probably was right about the killer. Probably these were sort of the mindset that was going on. But yeah, just for him to say all that stuff is so wildly unprofessional. But on the other hand, he's not actually a cop, so I guess that kind of works.
And as he's doing that, for all of those characters, he's unraveling their psyche and throwing it out there, just whatever. I'm saying it. I don't care whether you like it or not. While that's happening, we're learning all about his psyche. I mean, this is a man who's got so many things that society would put him down for. He smokes like a house on fire, and he's always got a stub of a cigarette. He doesn't even ever seem to have a new cigarette. It's just a little stub with the big ash hanging off it. And he drinks. He goes to the guy's house, and the guy says, would you like a drink? Well, anyway, most shows these, oh, no, I can't. I'm on duty. No, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
He walks into his house, goes right into the little bar that they've got, pours himself a drink, gambles like nobody's business, and even admits to his wife, well, she's kind of thrown him over now because he's just increased the mortgage. The money's gone. His credit card's overrun because he's gambling. He writes checks, and everybody's passing, we're not taking that check from you. So obviously he's a bad check writer too. He's got so many issues that are wrong with him while he's trying to sort out everybody else in the world. But as he's doing that, that's when we really get to learn who he is. And that's what makes that show, I think, so successful.
Yeah, it's nice too, because again, just reading, stuff on Wikipedia or whatever, when I was, preparing for this episode, the way they describe the character, it's kind of a disservice to the character where they do just say, drinking problem, gambling problems, blah, 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 this, that, the other thing, alcoholism, all this stuff. But when you just lay it out like that, I expected the character to be more of a wreck than he is, because he's not even like, sometimes you see shows about like people that are functional alcoholics or functional this, functional that. He doesn't even seem like that. He kind of seems fine. He just has all these things that are happening as well. Like it's not too unbalanced in like it almost becomes like a superhero thing with some characters where they're just so drug addicted or so alcoholic, but somehow they still do stuff.
But he can cope.
Yeah.
And he's so arrogant. You see that right from the first scene. He's in the college or the university where he lectures, and he's just standing there at the front, just throwing the papers at people. Here, he's calling their name, and the papers are flying around, and we're done. And that's it. Like, just total arrogance.
And I guess just from a tech standpoint, I think it definitely helps that maybe because a lot of the shots are outdoor or whatever, but it definitely seems like it must have been shot on film because visually it holds up fine. It looks great despite being from 1993. The main thing where you can kind of tell it's an older show is the sound mixing. Really was the more we were watching it, the more weird it started to seem, where it'd be like the just the ambient sound of like kids in the neighborhood are as loud, if not louder, than the principal dialogue. But then also when he was in that guy's house doing a little examination and stuff, it was just the drip of a tap. And it was so loud.
It was loud.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. It was very loud.
So I don't know if that was just something about BBC shows of the era, or maybe just every show was like that and we didn't notice because we were watching them all on an old TV with, a crappy speaker, like maybe sound mixing and microphones just weren't as good in 1993. I'm not really sure, but now...
See, they wanted to keep the realism of the show because rather than just lock those things out, they wanted you to know, like when he went into that man's bathroom, how slovenly it was. The curtains kind of hanging off in the corner, the taps dripping. This is a man who does not care about what his house looks like. They go to the apartment complex and you hear the kids in the background and you hear a baby crying, like it's almost like the baby's in his arms. It's so loud. But those would be sounds that you would hear in those places, whereas some TV shows would cut all that out because they would want the scene to be very pristine. These guys don't. They were going for realism.
Right. I'd have to assume, again, I don't know a ton about audio tech of the time, but it made me think of when we watched The Waltons, which was, even further back in the 70s, but the bird chirping sounds were really loud. But I got to assume it's probably just that all of that stuff was analog back then. They recorded it to actual tape. So it was just harder to mix. Where nowadays everything's digital. Like all they would have had to do is go into their computer, find the track that says baby in the background and just bring it down to 50% volume. It's probably just a lot harder to do that back then. So, but that's the only tech side. Because again, I mean, probably also because we're dealing with accents that are different than ours and stuff. So there definitely were times where we're trying to follow this quite complicated police procedural, situation, and you're sort of struggling to hear through the accents and through the soundtrack that's like sort of muddled. That's partially made it a little harder than it needed to be.
I think it's an excellent show, but I would recommend to anybody watching it, don't judge it on the first 10, 15, 20, even 25 minutes because you're introduced to a whole lot of complicated scenarios. You can't fit them together. They seem to make no sense. A lot of people would probably turn that off and say, I don't know what's going on here. But if you hang in there long enough, it all comes together and they do a wonderful job of creating reality because that's what it would be like in the real world. When a murder happens, the answer is not there immediately. You've got to go through all these hoops and corridors and psychological stuff to figure it out. And this show does it, but you just got to hang in there and get past that first 20 minutes or so.